Laura sat at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee while glancing over the morning paper. The warm sunlight filtered through the window, casting a golden glow across the room, and the scent of fresh pancakes filled the air. Across the table, Zara, her 10-year-old daughter, smiled as she carefully spooned a dollop of syrup onto her pancakes. Despite the limitations her wheelchair imposed, Zara was never one to let it dampen her spirits. Her laughter echoed through the kitchen as she shared a joke she had heard from her favorite show, her eyes sparkling with joy. Laura couldn't help but smile back, her heart swelling with love for the little girl who had brought so much light into her life. For a brief moment, all was perfect in their world, just a mother and daughter finding comfort in the simplicity of their routine. Laura watched as Zara expertly maneuvered her wheelchair around the table, effortlessly navigating the obstacles the world often threw in her way. She had grown up far beyond her years, showing resilience and grace, despite the challenges she faced daily. Laura, on the other hand, had devoted herself to ensuring that Zara's world was as full and as rich as any other child's. She had become a protector, a guide, and above all, a mother who never let go of hope. As Laura filled Zara's glass with juice, they exchanged a quiet look, a look that said everything. It was a look that spoke of years of hardship, of battles fought, of tears shed, and of a love so deep it could withstand any storm. This was their world, one of quiet moments and unspoken understanding, a world that had been carefully crafted over time. It was a world they had created together, where nothing could touch them, until now. The calm of this peaceful morning would soon be shattered, and the course of their lives would take a dramatic turn, all because of one person's actions. But for now, in this fleeting moment, Laura and Zara were simply mother and daughter, sharing a bond that no one could break. Margot Thompson was known in the neighborhood as the unrelenting force of the Homeowners Association, HOA, a title she wore like a badge of honor. In her 50s, she had built a reputation for enforcing every minute rule with an iron fist, whether it was the color of a mailbox or the positioning of trash cans. Her home was immaculate, the lawn perfectly trimmed, and her windows always spotless. The slightest deviation from her version of order was met with sharp disapproval and often a formal warning. To Margot, rules weren't just guidelines, they were law. Today, she was out on her usual rounds, clipboard in hand, checking the sidewalks for cracks, the trees for branches hanging too low, and the driveways for any sign of disarray. It was a warm, breezy afternoon, and most neighbors were enjoying their front yards. But Margot was in a different world, one where perfection reigned, and anything less was a threat to the peace she believed she was upholding. As she passed by Lara's house, her sharp eyes immediately noticed the faint wheel marks left on the sidewalk by Zara's wheelchair. Margot's face contorted into a frown as she halted in front of the house. She could see Laura and Zara through the window, their laughter a stark contrast to the tension she was about to bring. Margot approached the front door with the precision of someone who had done this 100 times before, her steps purposeful and cold. She didn't bother knocking, just raised her hand and knocked once firmly on the door. Laura opened the door, a warm smile on her face. "Hey, Margot, what's going on?" Margot didn't return the smile. Instead, she held up a finger, pointing toward the sidewalk where the faint traces of Zara's wheelchair were still visible. "Laura," she began, her voice stern, "I need to talk to you about the marks on the sidewalk." Lara's smile faded, but she kept her composure. "Oh, I'm sorry, Margot. I'm sure it's just from Zara's chair. We don't mean to damage anything." "That's the issue," Margot snapped, her tone cutting through the conversation. "These marks are unacceptable. It's not just your property, it affects the whole neighborhood." She glanced around as if expecting other neighbors to be watching. The HOA has regulations for a reason. It's about maintaining the community's aesthetics. If every resident started leaving marks like this, we'd have a mess on our hands. Laura took a deep breath, holding back the frustration that began to bubble up inside her. She knew Margot well enough to understand that reasoning with her was often futile. "Margot, Zara can't walk. She's in a wheelchair because of her condition. She can't help it if the chair leaves marks on the pavement. But Margot wasn't listening. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze hardening. I don't care about your reasons. I care about the appearance of this neighborhood. If your daughter's wheelchair is causing damage, then you need to do something about it. Her tone left no room for negotiation. Laura stood firm, but the sting of Margot's words hit her harder than she expected. She had been dealing with Zara's condition for years, fighting for her every step of the way, but here was Margot, an outsider, dictating how her family should live. I'll make sure we're more careful in the future, Laura said, her voice calm but laced with an edge. Margot, however, wasn't done. See that you do, she replied curtly, her gaze lingering for a moment before she turned on her heel and walked away, her shoes tapping sharply on the pavement. As she walked back to her immaculate house, she shot a glance over her shoulder, making sure Laura was watching. She was always watching. Laura stood in the doorway, her chest tight with frustration. She could feel the blood pounding in her ears, and for a moment she just stood there, staring at the marks on the pavement. They seemed so trivial, yet they had triggered something deeper within Margot, a desire to exert control over the smallest details of their lives. And Zara, innocent and unaware, was caught in the crossfire of this power struggle. Laura closed the door softly and turned to face her daughter, who had overheard the exchange from inside. Zara's eyes were wide, a look of confusion and hurt on her face. "Mom, I didn't mean to make trouble," she said quietly, her voice filled with guilt. Laura knelt beside her daughter, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "Zara, you haven't made any trouble. It's just that Margot thinks things have to be perfect, even if it means hurting people. But we won't let her control us." Zara nodded slowly, though the discomfort in her eyes remained. "But I can't help it, Mom." Laura gave her a reassuring smile. "I know, sweetheart. I know." The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze for Laura. The weight of Margot's words lingered in the back of her mind, gnawing at her. She tried to shake it off, but something about the encounter felt wrong. Far more than just a simple complaint about a few marks on the sidewalk. It felt personal, and she knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The next day, the confrontation escalated. Zara was outside, attempting to enjoy the warm weather, when Laura heard Margot's voice again. She stepped out the front door and saw Margot standing by the sidewalk, waiting. "Laura," Margot called out, her tone even more forceful than the day before. "This time, I'm asking you to take action. The marks are getting worse." Laura felt a surge of anger rise up. "What do you want me to do, Margot? I can't change Zara's condition." Margot crossed her arms and raised an eyebrow. "Well, maybe it's time to reconsider living here if it's such a problem. We don't need any more disruptions." Lara's eyes flashed with fury, her protective instincts over Zara kicking into full gear. "This is Zara's home. You don't get to tell us where we can and can't live." Margot stood her ground, her lips curling into a thin, condescending smile. "You'll learn, Lara. You'll learn that some things are bigger than you and your little girl's problems." Lara, fighting back tears of anger, clenched her fists, but before she could respond, Margot turned and walked away, leaving Lara standing there, feeling powerless and humiliated. The tension had now fully ignited, and Lara knew that it wasn't just about marks on the pavement anymore. It was about her family's right to live in peace, something Margot wasn't willing to let go of without a fight. The tension between Lara and Margot had been building for days, and it finally came to a head in a way neither of them could have anticipated. Lara had just returned from the grocery store, the bag still in her hands, when she heard the unmistakable sound of Margot's voice, sharp and demanding. She stepped outside to find Margot standing at the edge of the sidewalk again, her arms crossed over her chest as she glared down at Zara, who was wheeling herself slowly along the path, trying to enjoy the fresh air. Margot's eyes narrowed at the sight of the faint tracks left behind by the wheels of Zara's chair, her face contorted in irritation. "Lara," Margot called out sharply, her tone dripping with disdain. "This is getting ridiculous. You need to do something about this mess." She gestured toward the marks on the pavement as if they were a crime. Your daughter is destroying the neighborhood, and it's only getting worse. Lara's stomach twisted with anger. She had been trying to avoid another confrontation, but Margot was relentless. She stepped forward, putting herself between Margot and Zara. "You need to stop, Margot," Lara said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Zara's condition isn't something she can help. You can't keep blaming her for something that's out of her control." Margot didn't even flinch. Instead, she took a step closer, her voice growing louder. "It's unacceptable. Your daughter is a burden to this neighborhood. What will people think when they see her marks everywhere? This is supposed to be a well-maintained, pristine place." Her words were venomous, but it wasn't just the harshness of her tone that shocked Lara, it was the coldness in her eyes. Margot's words were designed to wound, to make Zara feel small and unworthy. Lara's breath caught in her chest, but she wasn't about to back down. "You don't understand. Zara can't help it. And if you don't back off right now, I swear I will." But before Lara could finish her sentence, Margot moved swiftly, stepping past her and toward Zara's wheelchair. She reached down and, with a surprising burst of force, shoved the wheelchair, knocking it off balance. Zara's eyes widened in shock as the wheels tipped, and in an instant, the chair jerked forward, causing her to lose control. The world seemed to slow down in that moment. Lara's heart dropped as she saw Zara's body tumbling out of the chair. Her hands shot out to catch her, but it was too late. Zara hit the pavement with a sickening thud, her legs crumpling under the impact. Lara's blood ran cold, and for a moment she was frozen in place. "Zara!" Lara screamed, rushing toward her daughter, her voice filled with panic and disbelief. She knelt down beside Zara, who was lying on the ground, her face twisted in pain, her legs bent in an unnatural angle. Tears welled up in Zara's eyes as she whimpered, her hands clutching at her legs in a desperate attempt to ease the pain. "Mom, my legs," Zara gasped, her voice shaky. Lara's heart shattered as she gently cradled Zara's head in her lap. "Zara, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry this happened." Her hands trembled as she checked her daughter's legs, but it was clear from the angle they were bent that they were broken. "Don't worry, sweetheart. We're going to get you help." But Margot stood there, unmoving, her expression unreadable as she watched the scene unfold. There was no remorse in her eyes, only a cold, detached gaze. She shouldn't have been in the way. Margot muttered under her breath, as though Zara's injury was simply an unfortunate consequence of her existence. Lara's anger flared, but she held herself back, focusing on Zara. "You stay with me, baby," she said softly, her voice shaking as she gently stroked Zara's hair. She glanced back up at Margot, fury boiling in her chest. "This is your fault," Lara spat, her voice filled with venom. "You did this." Margot didn't respond. She just turned and walked away, her steps measured and purposeful, as though nothing had happened. Lara could hear the distant echo of Margot's footsteps fading into the background as she clung to Zara, refusing to let go. Lara rushed Zara to the hospital, her heart pounding in her chest with each passing second. The drive was a blur of flashing lights and muffled voices. Zara's labored breathing filled the car, and every time Lara glanced over at her daughter, she could see the tears in her eyes. The pain was evident, and Lara's own chest tightened in agony. By the time they arrived, the hospital staff had already prepared for their arrival. A team of nurses rushed to Zara's side, quickly moving her from the car and into the emergency room. Lara was left standing in the hallway, helpless as she watched the doctors and nurses work around her daughter. She clutched the edges of the waiting room chair, her fingers digging into the upholstery. Every minute felt like an eternity. It wasn't long before a doctor approached her, his face solemn. "Miss Carter," he asked gently, "we've assessed the injury. Your daughter has multiple fractures in both legs. The impact of the fall caused the bones to break in several places." Lara's heart skipped a beat. "Is she going to be okay?" The doctor nodded, but there was a hint of concern in his eyes. "It's going to be a long recovery process. We'll need to set the bones and put her in a cast. But she's young, and with proper care, she'll heal." Lara let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. But as the relief began to settle in, a wave of guilt washed over her. "I should have done more to stop it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Zara, lying on the examination table, looked up at her mother with wide eyes, fear and guilt mingling in her expression. "I didn't mean to make trouble, Mom. I never wanted to hurt anyone." Laura shook her head, her throat tight. "You didn't make trouble, baby. You're the strongest person I know. You didn't do anything wrong." She forced a smile, though her heart ached at seeing her daughter so vulnerable. But the truth was, Laura didn't know how to stop the feeling of helplessness that gnawed at her. It wasn't just the injury that hurt, it was the injustice. It was the cold, deliberate action of Margot that had caused this pain, and that reality felt like a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. As the doctor prepared Zara for the procedure, Laura stood by her daughter's side, refusing to leave. No matter how bad things got, she would fight for Zara, just like she always had. Laura stood at the entrance of the HOA office, her breath shallow but controlled. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest, each step toward the building heavier than the last. The cold, sterile atmosphere of the office contrasted sharply with the warmth of her home, where her daughter should have been recovering in peace. Instead, she was lying in a hospital bed, her legs in casts, a painful reminder of the injustice that had been done to her. Lara's hands clenched into fists at her sides as she walked past the receptionist and into the small conference room where Margot was already seated. Margot, as usual, was impeccably dressed, her glasses perched on the edge of her nose as she reviewed a set of papers, her demeanor as cold and detached as ever. "Laura," Margot said, not even looking up from her papers, "what brings you here today?" Lara's heart thudded painfully in her chest, but she forced herself to speak, her voice steady and unwavering. "I'm here to hold you accountable for what you did to my daughter, Margot." At the mention of Zara, Margot finally looked up, her expression a mask of indifference. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've already told you it was an accident." She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms as if the matter were beneath her. "Your daughter was in the wrong place at the wrong time." Laura felt a surge of rage, but she kept it in check. "You pushed her. You shoved her out of her chair. You caused her to fall. And now she's in the hospital with broken legs because of your actions." Margot's eyes narrowed, but she remained calm, almost smug. "It was an unfortunate accident, Laura. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. Your daughter was being difficult, and I simply asked her to move." Her tone was dismissive, as if Zara's injury was no more significant than a scuff on the pavement. Lara's voice shook with fury. "That's not what happened. You did it on purpose, Margot. You deliberately pushed her. You knew exactly what you were doing." The silence between them stretched, thick and suffocating. Margot didn't speak right away, but Laura could see the flicker of unease in her eyes. She was used to being in control, used to people bending to her will. But not today. Not this time. "I'm not going to let you get away with this," Laura continued, her voice a low growl. "You hurt my daughter, and I'm going to make sure you pay for it." Margot's face tightened, but she refused to back down. "You're wasting your time. No one is going to believe you over me. I have the HOA on my side. I've been on the board for years. You're just a disgruntled neighbor trying to make trouble." Laura stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "I don't care what you think, Margot. I don't care about your position or your power. You've hurt my daughter, and you're going to be held accountable for it." The room was electric with tension, the walls seemingly closing in as Margot's arrogance began to crack. For the first time, Laura saw a flicker of fear in her eyes, but it was fleeting, quickly replaced by a smug smirk. "I'll see you in court then," Margot sneered. Laura didn't flinch. "You better. I'll make sure the truth comes out, and I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are." Laura turned on her heel and stormed out of the office, leaving Margot sitting there, her carefully constructed walls of control crumbling. For the first time in a long while, Laura felt a glimmer of hope. This fight wasn't over yet. She was just getting started. The following weeks felt like a blur. Laura hired a lawyer, Jordan, a sharp, determined woman in her mid-30s who had a reputation for taking on tough cases and never backing down. From the moment they met, Laura knew she had found someone who would fight for her and Zara. Jordan was quick to start gathering evidence. They requested surveillance footage from the neighborhood cameras, interviewed witnesses, and began building a case against Margot and the HOA. It wasn't easy. Every step forward seemed to come with a new obstacle. The HOA tried to bury the issue, pressuring neighbors to stay silent or avoid getting involved. Margot, of course, maintained her version of events, insisting that the whole incident was just a misunderstanding. But Laura wouldn't let up. Every phone call with Jordan, every document she signed, every strategy session felt like a small victory. She kept reminding herself that this was about more than just getting justice for Zara. It was about sending a message, about showing that no one, no matter how powerful they were, could get away with hurting her daughter. As the days passed, the legal process wore on. The paperwork piled up and the anticipation grew. Laura was exhausted, physically and emotionally, but she stayed focused. Each visit to the hospital to check on Zara felt like a painful reminder of the stakes. Her daughter was healing, but the emotional scars were still there. Zara had become withdrawn, hesitant, unsure of her place in the world. The wheelchair, once a symbol of her strength, now felt like a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. Laura did everything she could to keep her spirits up, reassuring Zara that things would get better. "We're going to make sure Margot pays for what she did," Laura promised, even though she couldn't shake the fear that maybe, just maybe, Margot's influence was too powerful. One evening, as they sat in their small living room, Jordan called with news that both excited and terrified Laura. "We've got the first court date," Jordan said, her voice steady but tinged with the gravity of the situation. "This is it. It's time to take Margot down." Laura's heart raced. This was the moment they had been working toward, the culmination of months of effort. But the nerves crept in. Court battles were unpredictable. What if they didn't win? What if the truth was drowned out by Margot's wealth, her influence, her connections? "We're ready," Laura said, trying to steady her nerves. "We've got the truth on our side. We can't back down now." And so, the battle continued. With every passing day, the tension mounted. Laura and Jordan spent countless hours preparing their case, going over the details, rehearsing the key points they needed to make. They needed the jury to understand the full extent of what had happened to Zara. They needed them to see the cruelty behind Margot's actions. They needed them to understand that what was at stake wasn't just Zara's injury, it was the truth and the right to hold people accountable for their actions. The anticipation in the air was thick. Laura could feel it, the weight of the upcoming trial, the pressure. But for the first time in months, she felt a spark of hope, a sense that justice might finally be within reach. The legal battle was about to begin, and Laura was ready to fight. The day of the trial arrived, and the air in the courtroom was thick with tension. The room buzzed with nervous energy as people shuffled into their seats, whispers filling the space. Laura sat at one of the benches, her hands tightly gripping her purse. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on her chest, but she had made a promise to herself. No matter what happened, she would not allow Margot to get away with what she had done to Zara. Across the room, Margot sat smugly with her attorney, her posture straight, her expression cold and calculating. She had always been the one in control, the one calling the shots. But now, as she looked across the courtroom at Laura, there was an undeniable flicker of unease in her eyes. Laura could feel it, the smallest crack in Margot's carefully constructed armor. She could almost taste the victory that was about to be within her reach. Jordan, Laura's attorney, stood up with an air of quiet confidence. She had been preparing for this day for weeks, and she was ready. The evidence was overwhelming, and with every passing minute, it became clearer that Margot's malicious actions could not be ignored. The judge called the court to order, and the trial began. Jordan wasted no time, stepping forward to present their case. Her voice was steady and measured as she began outlining the events that led to Zara's injury. She described the confrontation between Laura and Margot, highlighting Margot's refusal to show any empathy toward Zara's condition. The audience could hear the subtle but distinct rise in tension in Jordan's voice as she revealed how Margot had deliberately shoved Zara's wheelchair, resulting in the devastating fall. Jordan then introduced key pieces of evidence, surveillance footage from the neighborhood cameras that showed Margot approaching Zara's chair and, in a deliberate motion, forcing it off balance. The footage was clear, irrefutable. The images of Zara tumbling to the ground, her legs twisting unnaturally beneath her, flashed on the screen for everyone to see. Laura felt her heart lurch in her chest as she watched the horrifying footage again. It was a stark reminder of the trauma they had endured, but it was also the final nail in Margot's coffin. Margot's attorney, trying to salvage the case, stood up and attempted to discredit the evidence. "Your Honor," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "this footage is circumstantial at best. It's not conclusive proof of any malintent. What happened was simply an accident." But Jordan was ready. She tore into his argument with precision. "An accident? No, Mr. Thompson. An accident is something that happens unintentionally. What we have here is a clear act of aggression, a deliberate attempt to cause harm. Margot Thompson's actions were calculated and malicious." The courtroom was silent for a moment as the weight of Jordan's words settled in. Laura could feel the tide turning. The defense had nothing left to stand on. They had attempted to play the victim, but the truth was now undeniable. Margot, sitting rigidly in her chair, shot daggers at Laura across the room, her face twisted in a mixture of anger and disbelief. She had underestimated how far Laura would go, how much fight she had in her. Lara's resolve had been tested, but now it was stronger than ever. She wasn't just fighting for justice, she was fighting for her daughter, for the future, and for the truth that had been buried beneath Margot's lies for too long. The judge listened carefully to both sides, his face inscrutable. But as the trial continued, it became increasingly clear that he was leaning in Lara's favor. Jordan's closing arguments were powerful, highlighting the trauma Zara had endured and the emotional toll it had taken on their family. She didn't just speak about the physical injury, she spoke about the fear and anxiety Zara now carried with her every day. She spoke about how a simple outing had turned into a life-altering event, not just for Zara, but for Laura as well. The courtroom was electric with tension as the judge finally called for a recess. Laura sat back in her seat, her heart pounding in her chest, waiting for the final verdict. The following day, the courtroom was packed again, the atmosphere even heavier than before. The judge stood up, his gavel poised in his hand, ready to make his decision. Laura could feel the anticipation rippling through the room, the eyes of everyone in the courtroom locked on the judge. He cleared his throat and addressed the court. "After careful consideration of all the evidence presented and the testimonies heard, I have come to a decision." His voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable authority in it. "It is clear that the actions of Margot Thompson were not accidental. They were deliberate and malicious, resulting in significant harm to the plaintiff, Zara Carter." Lara's breath caught in her throat, her eyes welling with tears. She reached out and took Zara's hand, squeezing it tightly. Zara looked up at her, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. The judge continued, "Margot Thompson is hereby ordered to pay for all medical expenses related to Zara's treatment, as well as compensation for emotional distress caused by her actions." A murmur ran through the courtroom as the words sank in. It was happening. Justice was being served. But that is not all. The judge added, his tone firm. The Homeowners Association, under Margot Thompson's leadership, failed to act appropriately in this matter. As a result, the HOA is also required to enact reforms to ensure that no further harm comes to residents, particularly those with disabilities. Margot Thompson is hereby removed from her position on the board. Lara's chest tightened with relief. The weight of it all was lifting. She glanced over at Margot, who had gone pale at the ruling. The woman who had caused so much pain, who had tried to control and belittle them, was finally facing the consequences of her actions. Jordan smiled briefly at Laura, her eyes filled with pride. "We did it." Laura could hardly believe it. The battle had been long and hard, but they had won. The truth had prevailed. She had fought not just for justice, but for her daughter, for every parent who had ever felt powerless in the face of an injustice. Margot sat there in stunned silence, her once unshakable composure gone. She looked like a woman who had been defeated, and in that moment Lara felt a sense of victory that no words could fully capture. The gavel came down, and the room erupted in a flurry of whispers and murmurs. But for Lara and Zara, the world outside the courtroom seemed to fade away. All that mattered was that they had made it through the storm. They had faced the darkest of times, and they had come out on top. Lara wrapped her arms around Zara, holding her tightly. "We did it, baby," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "We got through it. We're going to be okay." Zara, her face softening into a smile, nodded. "I knew we would, Mom. I knew we could." In that moment, Lara knew that nothing would ever break their bond. They had fought together and they had won. The road ahead would still be hard, but with the weight of this victory behind them, they could face anything. And for the first time in months, Lara felt a sense of peace settle over her heart. Justice had been served, and her daughter could begin to heal. The sun was setting as Lara and Zara pulled into the driveway of their home, the familiar sight of their house both comforting and bittersweet. The journey back from the courthouse had been long and filled with a mixture of emotions. The overwhelming weight of the court victory was finally beginning to sink in, but there was still a quiet sadness in Lara's heart. It wasn't just the victory that had been hard-won, it was the emotional toll of everything they had endured. As they parked in front of the house, Zara, her legs still encased in casts, turned to her mother with a soft smile. "Mom, we did it," Zara said, quietly, her voice filled with wonder. Her eyes, once clouded with fear and uncertainty, now glimmered with a renewed sense of hope. Despite the hardship she had faced, there was a lightness to her now. It was as if the weight of Margot's actions had finally been lifted off her shoulders. Lara smiled back at her daughter, though it wasn't without a tinge of sadness. "We did, sweetheart. We fought for you and we won." She reached over and gently squeezed Zara's hand, the familiar touch offering both of them a sense of comfort. As they made their way inside, Lara was struck by how much had changed since the day of the incident. The house still felt like home, but the events of the past months had left their mark. The small touches that had once felt so simple now held deeper meaning. Every corner of their home had been a place of struggle and survival. And yet, despite everything, here they were, standing together, stronger than ever. Zara, still a bit unsteady on her feet, slowly wheeled herself into the living room. Her wheelchair had become both a symbol of her strength and a reminder of the cruelty she had endured. But now Lara saw it differently. The chair was no longer a symbol of her limitations. It was a tool that had carried her through the storm. It had been a constant in a world that had threatened to tear them apart, and now it represented their resilience. As Lara sat down beside her daughter on the couch, Zara rested her head against her shoulder. The two of them sat in quiet companionship, both reflecting on the journey that had led them to this moment. Lara thought back to the days when the fight had seemed endless, when it had felt like the world was against them. But in the face of it all, they had never given up. They had faced Margot's cruelty head-on, and now they had come out on top. Zara shifted slightly, her casted legs resting on a pillow as she looked up at her mother. "Mom," she began softly, "I know it hurt. I know I made you worry. But I'm okay. I'm going to be okay." Lara's heart swelled with pride as she looked down at her daughter. Zara had always been a fighter, even before the incident. But now, after everything they had been through, Lara saw a new strength in her, one that had been forged in the fire of adversity. Zara had weathered the storm, and now she was ready to move forward. "I know, baby," Lara replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I know you are, and I'm so proud of you. I always have been, and I always will be." Zara's smile widened, the corners of her eyes crinkling with joy. "I'm glad we're going home, Mom. I'm glad we're back here. We've come so far." Lara nodded, a small tear slipping down her cheek as she reached up to wipe it away. She had cried so many times during the past few weeks, out of frustration, anger, and sadness. But now, these tears felt different. They were tears of relief, of triumph, of knowing that they had finally reached the other side. As the evening wore on, Lara and Zara settled into a new routine. The quiet moments they shared, once filled with worry and fear, now held a sense of peace. They talked about the future, about the things they would do together, once Zara had fully recovered. They dreamed about the places they would go, the things they would experience. It wasn't just about healing physically anymore. It was about moving forward, about reclaiming the life they had lost. That night, as Lara tucked Zara into bed, she stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her daughter settle under the covers. The room was bathed in soft moonlight, and for the first time in weeks, Lara felt a deep sense of calm. The storm had passed. They had fought hard for this peace, and they had earned it. "I love you, Zara," Lara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're my everything." Zara smiled up at her mother, her face soft and serene. "I love you too, Mom. You're the strongest person I know." Lara closed the door gently behind her, stepping into the hallway. She felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over her. Despite everything that had happened, they were still standing. They were still here. Outside, the world seemed quieter now, as though it had exhaled with them. The harshness of the past was fading, and in its place there was hope. Lara knew the road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges, but for the first time in months, she felt ready to face whatever came next. In the stillness of the night, Lara sat down in the living room, her hands folded in her lap, a soft smile on her face. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she could breathe. She could finally let go of the fear that had consumed her. They were going to be okay. Together, they had weathered the storm. And now, they were ready to embrace the future, stronger, united, and filled with hope. As Lara closed her eyes, she could almost hear Zara's laughter echoing through the house. And for the first time, it wasn't tinged with pain. It was pure, unbridled joy. The joy of a mother and daughter who had fought for each other and had come out victorious. It was the sound of healing, of moving forward. It was the sound of home. If you found Lara and Zara's journey inspiring, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to HOA Karen Shorts for more powerful, emotional stories like this one. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And if you haven't yet, turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for more gripping tales of justice, resilience, and triumph. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.